Good morning, welcome, bonjour, and welcome to the session, How to Support International Students in Canada with the OCASI Executive Director Network. My name is Margaret Walton-Roberts. I'm a professor at Wilfrid Laurier University and a member of the Building Migrant Resilience in Cities Research Network. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that the university where I work, Wilfrid Laurier University, and the location where my home is, are located on the Haldeman Tract, the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. The treaty that was signed for this land was part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people. And it symbolizes the agreement to share, protect our resources, and not to engage in conflict. And despite being the largest reserve demographically in Canada, these nations now reside on less than 5% of this original territory after losing much of it to the settlement of newcomers. And so it's significant to recognize the territory where I am currently located, and I thank you for that. I want to let you know that this session has been organised by the Building Migrant Resilience in Cities Research Partnership, and this partnership brings together a range of key actors working on issues of immigration and settlement. We study issues of resilience in 6 large and medium-sized cities in Ontario and Quebec. We believe that understanding settlement in these cities can give us an in-depth understanding of the strategies that migrants use to overcome settlement challenges in municipalities in Canada. Our session today will include 3 panelists and then a responder from IRCC. We will be having French and English translation, so please select the translation that you require using the button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome our panelists, and I'll introduce them. The first panelist will be Sarome Rowe. She's an organizer with Migrant Students United at the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. Migrant Students United is current and former international students who are organizing for good jobs, open work permits, access to healthcare and universal services, and full immigration status for all. Over 12,000 have signed their petition calling for COVID-19 crisis supports specific to international students' needs, and you can find out more about them by searching migrantrights.ca/migrant students. Our second panelist is Armin Boomerang. He works at the Centre for Social Aid aux Migrants as the International Student Division with Integration and Settlement Department. At the same organization. Founded in 1947, the Centre for Social Aid aux Migrants, CSAI, is dedicated to serving immigrants and government-assisted refugees in Greater Montreal. Mr. Boomerang holds a PhD in comparative law from the University of Strasbourg, France. He's conducted a postdoctoral research at the Centre de Recherche en Droit Public at the University of Montreal, and has been a member of the Canadian Council for Refugee Executive Committee since 2018. Rahilia Mushtaq is the General Manager at COSTI and has over 28 years of experience in project management in international development. She focuses on girls' education and social services. In Canada, Rahilia has managed newcomer information centres in Peel and Halton region. At COSTI, Rahilia is working with Orientation to Ontario, O2O, and International Student Connect, ISC programs. O2O and ISC coordination present an opportunity to work with OCASI, CSCNH, and 30 settlement agencies and 21 universities and colleges across the province. David Kasabak joined Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada Settlement and Integration Branch in August 2020 and serves as the Senior Director, Horizontal Policy and Programs. Prior to that, in IRCC's Immigration Branch, he served as Director in 3 positions covering family reunification, temporary resident policy and programs, and most recently, Federal Economic Policy and Programs including International Student Program. David graduated with a PhD in Comparative Politics from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and holds degrees from York University and the University of Ottawa. So I thank and welcome all of our panelists. Unfortunately, Carl Nicholson, who would have been with us today, was unable to join. I will ask our three panelists, our three initial panelists, to respond to questions we've posed, and then we will turn to our IRCC representative, David Kasabak, to respond. We want to take questions from the audience, and we will do so at the end of hearing from all of our panelists. So I would ask you to please submit your questions using the Q&A function. So we'll begin with the questions for our community representatives, Saram, Armin, and Rohelia. I would ask you, I have 4 basic questions, and I'll invite you to respond using 7 minutes each. So basically, what is being done for international students for the pandemic, during the pandemic? The second is, how are international students being supported during the pandemic? What more do you think needs to be done for international students while the pandemic continues? And what could be done by governments to help? And so those are the 4 questions. I'll invite our panelists to respond to them. And we'll begin with Sarome Rowe from Migrant Students United.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you to my fellow panelists. Thank you, Margaret, for convening us for this very timely and important panel on how to support international students and what kind of supports and changes to immigration rules we really need. So, as Margaret said in the introduction, Migrant Students United is a cross-country organization of current and former migrant students. So there are more than an estimated 750,000 former and current international students in Canada on study permits, postgraduate work permits, as well as those who are in transition between visitors permits or tourist permits to a study permit, and those who have already lost status because immigration rules are requirements for PR are very challenging. So this is a very significant number of people who, like millions of other workers in Canada who have been affected by COVID-19, require very urgent support. So since March, we have surveyed over 3,500 current and former migrant students, held 13 info sessions with more than 4,000 students registered, and students who have been from every single province of Canada, as well as the Northwest Territories. And we have directly conducted focus groups and polling to determine migrant student needs and priorities. And from this, we created the petition, which over right now, 12,000 have signed, and every time someone signs a petition, a letter gets sent to Prime Minister Trudeau, as well as cabinet ministers. So for my presentation, I'd like to summarize the large overall concerns that current and former migrant students have, and concerns that must be addressed as part of the COVID-19 response and beyond, to ensure that we are recovering from this in a fair way. So firstly, healthcare. Currently, current and former migrant students in many provinces do not have access to adequate healthcare. So a patchwork of existing private insurance companies exist at public post-secondary institutions, but they do not include private educational institutions. So a number of the casework that I do is around accessing adequate healthcare. Students in between permits and those that have recently moved in between provinces and those who are awaiting a full-time job are not covered. And many students, because they're removed from their support systems, don't have access to the social networks that they can rely on, and are in many cases without work. And being without work means that for those who are on postgraduate work permits, they cannot access healthcare. And while we know that healthcare is a provincial matter, it directly ties to their federal immigration status. So we have been organizing to extend universal coverage to these people in an essential public health, as a part of an essential public health measure. We're also thinking about income supports. So many current and former migrant students have lost income. Campus closures and campus where current study permit holders can work full-time are currently closed, and the overall economic downturn means that they've lost jobs or that their hours of work have been drastically reduced, that they've been laid off and haven't been called back. So we have been hearing from hundreds of students who have been forced to turn to food banks and religious spaces for basic necessities. So the income supports that have already been announced are inaccessible to many students. In some cases, migrant students haven't accumulated enough hours for employment insurance or haven't been paid, earned $5,000 in the past 12 months. Many students also do not have adequate documentation for wages that they have been paid because they are working for cash due to having a temporary status, which makes them, which bars them from finding formal employment. Many right now are without active social insurance numbers because of delays in permit processing. This means that they can't access the emergency income supports that are available because it requires a valid SIN. Students who are recent graduates are finding extreme difficulty finding jobs in NOC O, A, and B, the jobs that are required for most immigration pathway programs, because there's an economic downturn. In the later part of my presentation, I'll be talking about a serious crisis that former international students who are on postgraduate work permit holders are facing, a situation where thousands could be deported if immigration rules don't change. So we have also seen that the Canada Emergency Student Benefit excluded international students, and it was announced on the same day that there was a removal of restriction of work hours for international students, which basically meant who are working in essential services. And now that that period has passed, students are now attending school in online courses, in some cases facing dramatically increased tuition fees at their schools, and are unable to work more than 20 hours off of campus, and they're reporting that it is very difficult for them. So, the permit restrictions pose a myriad of challenges for migrant students that are simply insurmountable in this climate and in this crisis, and it's deepening the crisis that they are in. For, like I mentioned, post-secondary students in public institutions are only allowed to work 20 hours off of campus, but campuses are closed. Students with applications in process are reporting delays and are falling into implied status, where their social insurance number and health cards are expiring, but cannot be reviewed because of the many delays and closures in Service Canada. So while the exemption of migrant students from border closures is a very critical and welcome step, and we are seeing that those who are attending schools on the DLI list, approved DLI list, are able to return. Many are not able to return and are still abroad, and cannot access income supports on top of that. We're also hearing that many migrant students and postgraduate work permit holders arriving to Canada are required to enter quarantine, but are reporting that they have nowhere to go because they have lost their homes and emergency accommodations have fallen through. So many students are suffering from job losses and cuts in wages, and are facing very difficulty paying high tuition fees. And one of the requirements of the conditions of the study permit is full-time or part-time enrollment in schools. And without being able to pay for tuition, we're seeing that students are worried about losing status here. So right now we have seen that students are organizing across Canada, like I said, in every province in Canada, as well as the Northwest Territories, in order to create change. And right now there is a very active campaign that we are supporting, where COVID-19 has changed everything, but these immigration rules are staying the same. And because the postgraduate work permit is a time-restricted permit, every day that passes without these necessary changes means that migrant student workers are running out of time. The key issue is that tens of thousands of international students are on these time-restricted permits, during which they have to complete 12 to 24 months of high-wage or high-skilled work in NOC O, A, or B jobs in order to qualify for permanent residency. But because of COVID-19, they have lost work and can't find jobs, and they have lost work like so many others, millions in Canada have. However, because they've lost work, they are facing deportation if they don't fulfill requirements for PR that are out of their control. So just this past Sunday in Toronto, current and former migrant students installed a massive work permit in front of immigration offices, calling for immediate renewal of the postgraduate work permit. The PGWP is a permit that migrant students can only get once in their lifetime. And during COVID-19, where these the current climate has changed and rules are going out of their control, we are calling for this very necessary measure to make the work permit renewable.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sarome. Can we move on to the next panelist? Thank you so much, and your work has really been appreciated. I know I work with many international students who have been really grateful for the information sessions that you've run, and they have certainly been glad to have some organizing to present the issues that they have been facing. So thank you so much, and thank you for that presentation. If we could move to our second panelist now, Armin. I think Armin will be sharing a screen and will make his presentation in French. So please do make use of the translation button that you can see at the bottom of your screens. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde, merci de m'avoir donné cette occasion. En fait, on m'avait dit que je vais être amené à présenter très rapidement les services qui existent pour les étudiants internationaux au Québec également, mais je vais essayer de l'adapter avec la situation actuelle. Juste pour vous rappeler très rapidement, le ministère de l'Immigration, de la francisation et de l'intégration au Québec finance beaucoup d'organismes communautaires, à peu près une centaine d'organismes communautaires qui soutiennent les nouveaux arrivants dans leur démarche d'installation et d'intégration au Québec. Et ces services étaient traditionnellement offerts aux résidents permanents qui sont là au Québec depuis moins de 5 ans, mais heureusement, depuis... Attendez, je crois qu'il y a un problème avec ma présentation. Mais de toute manière, ces services sont présents depuis 2019, depuis juillet 2019, pour les étudiants internationaux et les travailleurs temporaires aussi. Ça veut dire que désormais, le ministère de l'Immigration, de la francisation et de l'intégration au Québec finance les organismes communautaires pour intervenir auprès des étudiants internationaux et des travailleurs temporaires, ce qui malheureusement n'existe pas, si je ne me trompe pas, dans d'autres provinces et territoires. Alors là, on était très chanceux au moins à ce niveau au Québec parce que la mise en place de ce nouveau service a coïncidé, enfin la COVID-19 et l'arrivée de la pandémie a coïncidé avec la mise en place de ce nouveau service. Du coup, dans les organismes communautaires, on était capable justement accompagner les étudiants internationaux par rapport à leurs demandes. Cela dit, beaucoup de services qui sont rendus par ces organismes communautaires ne sont pas de manière complète financés par le gouvernement du Québec non plus. Mettons quand il y a les étudiants internationaux qui viennent nous voir et qui nous parlent de leurs problèmes psychologiques et psychosociaux suite à l'arrivée, suite à la pandémie et leurs besoins imminents à avoir des séances de consultation avec des psychologues. Malheureusement, on ne peut pas faire grand-chose pour eux parce que ces genres de services ne sont pas financés par le ministère de l'Immigration. En plus, ça n'existe pas en ce genre de financement parce que, comme vous le savez mieux que moi, les étudiants internationaux, quand ils arrivent, ils doivent avoir une assurance privée, soit à travers de l'université, soit une assurance qu'eux, ils achètent, et ça ne couvre pas ces genres de services. Alors, malheureusement, on n'était pas capable de les aider dans cette situation extrêmement difficile. Mais quand même, le fait que le ministère de l'Immigration a mis sur pied le service financé pour les étudiants internationaux à travers des organismes communautaires et également l'existence d'un programme qu'on appelle le parcours d'accompagnement personnalisé. Et ça a beaucoup aidé les organismes justement pour accompagner les étudiants. Désormais, les étudiants internationaux et les travailleurs temporaires, quand ils arrivent au Québec, ils vont être rencontrés par déjà à l'aéroport par des agents d'aide à l'intégration et ces agents d'aide à l'intégration vont faire une évaluation préliminaire de la situation des étudiants et selon et ils vont mettre sur pied, élaborer avec l'aide de la personne qui vient d'arriver au Québec un plan d'action par rapport aux démarches d'immigration, d'installation, d'emploi, vie collective et francisation pour accompagner les étudiants. Mais beaucoup de ces services ont dû être stoppés et arrêtés et suspendus à cause de la pandémie aussi. Alors, bien que le service existe, étant donné que les employés du ministère de l'Immigration au Québec font du télétravail et qu'à un moment donné, c'est très difficile justement pour les étudiants internationaux de venir au Canada. Maintenant, on se trouve dans une situation où il y a beaucoup d'étudiants qui commencent à faire leurs études depuis l'étranger, qui ont besoin d'accompagnement de la part des organismes communautaires en immigration, mais étant donné qu'ils n'ont pas encore une adresse ici au Québec, malheureusement, ne peuvent pas recevoir ce service et on ne peut pas les comptabiliser dans les services qu'on offre non plus. Aujourd'hui, nous rencontrons, en fait, nous recevons des appels, surtout de la part des étudiants internationaux à l'étranger qui ont quand même payé les frais d'université et qui se sont inscrits pour suivre des cours à l'université et on commençait même à passer des examens de midterm, comme on dit en anglais, mais malheureusement, à un moment donné, ils commencent à recevoir des messages de la part du gouvernement fédéral comme quoi leur permis de travail n'est pas finalement délivré parce que pour des raisons et des motifs qui sont connus par rapport aux étudiants internationaux. Et nous recevons beaucoup d'étudiants internationaux aujourd'hui qui viennent nous voir et qui ont des préoccupations par rapport au fait que est-ce qu'eux, ils respectent des conditions de séjour, leurs conditions de séjour au Québec ou pas. Alors, vous le savez mieux que moi, les étudiants internationaux, quand ils arrivent au Québec, si jamais ils décident de changer, ou au Canada de manière générale, s'ils décident de changer le programme d'études ou bien l'école, quand même, il ne faut pas qu'il y ait un écart ou comment dire, un intervalle de plus de 150 jours entre ces changements pour qu'on puisse considérer que ces étudiants internationaux respectent leurs conditions de séjour selon l'article 221 du règlement sur l'immigration et de la protection des réfugiés. Alors qu'on se trouve avec beaucoup d'étudiants et qui commencent une formation dans un collège. Et à cause de la COVID, la formation a dû être stoppée. À un moment donné, ils décident justement pour respecter les conditions de séjour de s'inscrire dans une autre école. Et l'autre école, normalement, était censée de commencer 2 mois, 3 mois plus tard, mais finalement, étant donné qu'ils n'ont pas le nombre suffisant d'étudiants pour les cours en ligne, le cours n'a pas lieu. Alors, du coup, on se trouve avec des étudiants qui sont dans cette situation très difficile par rapport à leur respect de conditions de séjour. Ce qu'on leur propose, c'est soit de faire une demande de fiche visiteur, soit de retourner dans leur pays de départ. Alors, les deux solutions ne sont pas très faciles pour les étudiants parce que ça évoque justement des frais, ça évoque comment dire, de faire une nouvelle demande d'immigration et pour eux, c'est extrêmement difficile. Et le fait qu'on a donné l'accès aux étudiants internationaux de travailler au-delà de 20 heures et jusqu'à dans les services essentiels. Mais beaucoup d'étudiants, ils se demandent est-ce que c'était un faveur que le gouvernement faisait aux étudiants ou c'était un faveur au niveau par rapport à l'économie du Canada parce que l'économie canadienne avait besoin justement de main-d'œuvre bon marché qui était prête à commencer à assumer, à travailler dans différents lieux. Déjà, c'était une mesure tout à fait provisoire qui s'est terminée au 31 août 2020 et que, en fait, les étudiants étaient amenés à travailler dans un domaine extrêmement parfois difficile ou bien qui nécessitait justement des mesures supplémentaires de sécurité, mais malheureusement, ces mesures de sécurité n'étaient pas en place. Alors, au moins au Québec, ces étudiants-là, étant donné que les organismes communautaires en immigration sont financés par le gouvernement, peuvent venir nous voir et nous poser leurs questions et nous, à travers d'organiser de différents webinaires ou de séminaires, on essayait de faire venir au sein de nos organismes justement des spécialistes en immigration, qu'ils essayaient justement de répondre à certaines préoccupations des étudiants, mais vous le savez comme moi, ces préoccupations sont énormes. Mais malheureusement, par rapport aux problèmes financiers vécus par les étudiants, surtout ceux et celles qui étaient dépendants de travail étudiant qu'ils faisaient 20 heures par semaine. Et malheureusement, on n'a pas eu beaucoup de réponses à apporter. Et la seule chose que les organismes communautaires ont pu faire, c'était de mettre sur pied les banques alimentaires justement pour aider ces étudiants-là juste pour qu'ils puissent se nourrir. Parce que là, rien que se nourrir, ça a été devenu justement une situation extrêmement problématique pour eux. Et il y a également d'autres préoccupations et de problèmes, mais malheureusement, je crois que je n'aurai pas suffisamment de temps d'en parler. Mais je vais y revenir à travers des réponses que je vais apporter éventuellement aux questions qui vont être posées plus tard.
Merci. I mean, we'll certainly have time for questions towards the end. So I'm very grateful of your keeping to time so we can hear from all of our panelists. So Mercy, thank you for that. Rahelia.
Hi there. Thank you, Margaret. Before I respond to the two questions which were posed for us, I just wanted to take a minute to just give a brief background of the work which is being done by Costa Immigrant Services in collaboration and in partnership with the settlement agencies across the province and also with the educational institution. So International Student Connect is working with 22 colleges and universities across the province since 2014. And this project has been funded by the Government of Ontario. It was one of the first projects of its kind in which the international students were being served as eligible clients. So the settlement agencies can provide them the information they were looking for, like the way they provide to the newcomers. And we work in partnership with the educational institutions. So we have the kind of their blessings to give this information to the international student. And there is a lot of collaboration between the settlement agencies, educational institution, and us as the provincial coordinator to make sure that we do not kind of duplicate the services, and we are providing them the information which is not primarily given by the international students, because as all of us know that the international students are doing a great, institutions are doing a great job in academically, they are providing them what the students are looking for, but when it comes to the settlement information, many of them may not have the right resources or expertise within their setup. So that said, I do agree, especially with Seram and of course Armin, that we are also hearing a lot from our partners and directly from the international students. They are facing similar concerns, and many of them are facing financial challenges. And as Armin said, that, you know, as a community organizations, yes, we can provide them the information, but we tangibly many of their challenges we may not be able to meet in terms of like we cannot make some resources of like financial resources available to them. But I feel that it is very, very important to share the information with them at the right time. In my experience, or in our experience, and especially I'm speaking on behalf of all our partners across the province who are working with the international students, that one of the primary challenges, we have been in operation almost for 6 years, and we have served over 30,000 international students, and we offer information sessions, one-on-one sessions, settlement counseling to those international students across the province. It's still one of the biggest challenge we find is connecting the dots, giving the information to the international students at the right time. And many of the institutions are really, really doing an amazing job, but there is still a big gap, because when our partners tell us that when they go to an institution, still there are many, many students who are not even aware that this project exists in the province for the last 6 years, or these settlement agencies are there, or there are other wider community networks. So I feel that in terms of what more could be done, the question was for the government to help. Yes, the government, I'm not saying the government is doing everything or is doing nothing. They are doing a lot, but this is a time when we have to all work in partnership. And that's where the educational institutions have to step up also in terms of connecting the students with the other networks, because we know that all their needs cannot be met by them. So that is one of my key message here, that I really want to make sure that, these partnerships which exist needs to work at a level that international students can become aware of what exists, because a lot of knowledge is being shared at the sector level, but not at the students level. And still there is somehow, I find resistance at many institutions, that they feel that the settlement sector may not be able to meet the need of the international students like in the last 6 years, and we have seen that that is not the case. Like international students are now facing issues which are very, very similar to the issues faced by the newcomers. And especially in the COVID-19, what we found, as we were approached by many of the institutions, that if we can quickly do a webinar and put it on our website, literally within the first 24 hours, this webinar was watched by over 300 students, which was amazing. Like, there's so much information on one hand was available by the government, by many other resources. And here is a simple webinar, which is again connecting them to all the resources which were shared by the government. And still it was viewed so many times. So connecting the dot is a very, very important piece during this COVID-19 scenario, because even whatever limited resources exist, if the international students are not aware about them, they will be bounced around like balls. Like they go to one office, and especially now in the COVID-19, they cannot even physically go somewhere. So they are really, really relying on online information or connecting with people or finding some information on on different websites, and then again making sure that that information is valid and that they can use this information in their to address whatever challenges they may be facing. One thing I do want to address that, like Saron mentioned, that we have started receiving huge number of emails, and most of the students are talking about the financial challenges. And by the way, when the students send those emails, they are not even talking about, they are not only from international students, while the project clearly identifies that it's only for international students, there are many issues are being raised by the newcomer domestic students also, because they also don't know where to go. They are there as domestic students, but they are still newcomers. So overall, the students are really, really in a tight spot. And they have many of the concerns which are, and I don't want to repeat the concerns cited by Saron in terms of the postgraduate work permit. One thing which is definitely lacking, and there is a need which can be done, is to address the mental health support to these students. Because many of the health services or their insurance plans which are They are undercovered, like covered right now. They do not offer many health services, like mental health services, and there is definitely a need. In fact, I just read something, a very interesting quote, because all of us also are feeling this exhaustion of online meeting. And someone explained that, one of the reason about, which is so tiring about these online meeting is, like, imagine going to a bar where you are going to meet your professor, where you are going to meet your boss, where you are going to meet, or you're going to date someone, and you are going to meet your colleagues. So online meeting is literally like that, that our forum is, our connectivity is only through this screen. There is no interaction at our end. So all of a sudden, our context has disappeared. And that applies more so to international students and students all over the world, because now they are using the same screen to study for 8 hours. And can you imagine, now that same screen is their only way to connect to the world? So really connecting the dots, making them aware about these services is very, very important, along with offering them mental health support. And one of the things which last thing, as my time is coming to an end, I would like to talk about is that I always say at every possible forum, and that is especially for David also, that those international students who have completed their studies have met their postgraduate work requirement. They have 1 year experience. If they can be provided access to the settlement services, like the settlement services are offered to the newcomer when they are still there in their source country and they are at the pre-arrival stage. So these international students do not fall through the crack, more so during this COVID-19 time than any other time, because we know that they have decided to make Canada their home. So that is one, if that flexibility can be created for those students. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rohelia. And thank you to all the panelists for sharing their thoughts and information. And we'll certainly have an opportunity to ask further questions. But now I'd like to turn to David Kasabak, our representative from IRCC. I'd like to ask David to comment on what we have learned from our wonderful panelists. Certainly for the Building Migrant Resilience in Cities research team, previous webinars that we have run have identified several challenges for international students, such as their eligibility for federal income support programs during the pandemic, and we certainly heard that from our panelists. The impact of online learning from their country of origin on the quality of their degrees, their eligibility for postgraduate work permits, and their chance of getting a job that will benefit their careers post-graduation. And again, we certainly heard that from our panelists. And thirdly, access to services at the institutions of higher learning and in the community that will help them overcome financial and health challenges during the pandemic. So I'd like to turn to David and ask him, how does the information shared here complement or supplement what you already know? Are we missing any important challenges facing international students during the pandemic? And what do we still need to learn? And so, David, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Margaret, for that. And thanks for the opportunity to join my fellow panelists today for the discussion. And I'm extremely excited to be here. I mean, it's a crucial topic, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. I might share some general thoughts, on some of the key themes, and then we can I'll stop talking and we can continue a bit of through a discussion. The first point, and I think one of the reasons we're here and we've got people sort of listening to this webinar is really recognizing and underscoring the massive contribution international students make, right, to Canada from many perspectives, and I've heard them this morning from my fellow panelists. The vitality of the post-secondary sector, of the education sector, and of institutions. I don't think that we've seen a doubling in international students in the last 5 years. We've seen a doubling of international students choosing colleges in Canada in the last 2 or 3 years. So there's been massive growth, which is, I think, contributing to the vitality. But it also contributes in a lot of different ways. And I think, Rohelia, I've heard you, Armin, same, Sharon, around, the social and economic contributions that international students make to their communities, but also in terms of bringing new ideas and innovation to institutions and communities. And I think a lot of why, of the international education strategy, and the reason that I think we, along with the provinces and territories, work so closely around the attraction and retention of students, is really around helping strengthen those cross-cultural competencies and developing international networks. I mean, I think there's a big why we do this, part of it. And as you've all mentioned, international students are a massive part of our immigration story. And we know, and I think that's why we're here, is really around the motivation that we see that they have to remain in Canada after graduation. And it makes a lot of sense. Strong language skills, a Canadian education credential, and experience living and working in our communities really make them extremely strong candidates for permanent residence. And I think we've seen over the last years, I mean, I think a commitment by the government, but also through at least permanent immigration pathways, that to try to really make that as efficient as possible. And we've seen some of the impacts. In 2019, 20% of all new permanent resident admissions were drawn from former international students. That's up 3 times in a decade. And you'll have seen, and I know it's a continued source of a lot of discussion by ministers, by the Prime Minister. The speech from the throne a few weeks ago, really putting immigration at front and center, right, in terms of our continued efforts for post-pandemic recovery, but definitely in terms of continuing to build Canada and prepare ourselves for the future. I think, and I heard it this morning, I think I would be remiss, and when I'm happy to get into this more in some of the questions and answers in our discussion in terms of some of the specifics in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, and acknowledging also the unique and concerning challenges that international students have faced, among others. And I think really your points around the fact that a lot of newcomers, it is a societal challenge that we're facing. And I'm happy to speak in the discussion a bit more in terms of some of the measures that we've done, and it's mainly selection and processing. I think one of the big concerns, and it's a lot of the work that we've done with provinces, with the education sector since March, was really around, I think, some of the first real efforts were really to try to ensure that students and prospective students continue to choose Canada to do their studies, excuse me, and some certainty around some of the pathways, whether it's the study permit and the processing, and expectations around postgraduate work permits and eligibility. So we can get into some more of that after, but I think, I just wanted to acknowledge that it is an extremely unprecedented and difficult time for many of our clients and many people who are here to work or study. Turning maybe to some of the themes that we've heard this morning, and I think some of the points that I think really will launch us on a good discussion. I highlight a couple of things, and I'm really going to jump off some of what Rahila was saying in terms of the connections and the making connections and drawing the linkages between our clients and actors and different parts of society that help. I think what the settlement and post-secondary sectors, there is a lot that we can learn and that sectors can learn from one another. And I think that's what's coming out of the remarks today, that there are, there's a number of things there, whether they're gaps, whether they're opportunities between the settlement and post-secondary sectors to bridge through. And I think in Ontario's case and Costi, I think what some of the work you're doing in terms of that better information sharing and connection. And I think from a settlement perspective, it's crucial for us to recognize that a number of a significant proportion of international students, because they are on a road to permanent residence, I think that gives us a collective interest in making sure that their needs are met. And I think there's opportunities to consider ways that in the settlement space, but also in the post-secondary institutions in that sector, how do we make sure that they're sharing information and resources and best practices to develop a bit more of a holistic understanding of the needs and experiences of international students, and leveraging the infrastructure that's in place. I think part of the work we're trying to do a lot more understanding of those things. Part of it is really around of evidence and the need for more solid and, dare I say, granular sense of what is available out there, because there is a patchwork. I think, Armin was presenting a lot of the supports that are available in Quebec. Ontario, there's a degree of support, and across the country there is a, it varies, and there's a patchwork. And I think it's part of the work ahead is to sort of assess, what is already out there, but also what the needs are. And I think that's why this conversation today is super useful and important, because we get a sense of what the challenges are. Because I think across the country, we hear sometimes challenges there is a challenge of underutilization, that students don't necessarily know where to turn, and maybe there are supports available. In other cases, though, it's the opposite. It's an overburdened system, and maybe not the inability, or the players and institutions are ill-equipped. What we're doing a lot with the provinces, and we've engaged now, we've started to work since the summer with provinces and our provincial and territorial counterparts in settlement, really to understand the degree of service provision that is occurring now with temporary residents and for international students in particular. We need to get a better sense of what's out there, what's being done, in order to figure out where else do we go, what else is needed. So I think, again, this discussion helps us really narrow and focus in on that. I think that some of the maybe two last points before I stop. And the first is really, and I heard Rayla say a lot around, and I'll sort of say, I think that the successful settlement integration, and I think our audience knows, you live this every day, and so it's not me saying it that makes it a reality, but it's a whole of society approach. We know that. I mean, I think not one player has all of the tools and all of the toolbox to be able to make an impact. And we're seeing, especially with regard to international students, a huge array of players at all levels of society who are implicated in attracting and retaining and supporting international students and really preparing for their long-term success. And I think this is an issue. It's on some of this that I think we have an opportunity to discuss, but also consider how we do better, frankly. And one of the persistent challenges that I think we hear, and I've heard it today, is really around the difficulty of breaking into the Canadian labor market. I mean, COVID aside, this is a longer standing issue, and we know that international students, after their postgraduates, they end up in lower skilled, lower wage jobs. Their outcomes compared to their peer group are sometimes lower, and all that means is it does set them out for a much longer, and I think sometimes a more arduous path to successful integration and long-term settlement success in Canada. So I think this is an area where, definitely there's a need to come together and continue to think around how we educate and bring employers along, how we continue to bring them to see the benefits of hiring international students, but also using this pool of talent really to a way that's commensurate with their studies and with the capital and the knowledge and the social capital they bring. So I can leave it there, Margaret, and then we can jump right into it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Thank you for that response. What I will do is I'll actually ask our panelists if they have any questions that they would like to share based on the discussions with each other and with David. But just before I do that, I want to just go over the Q&A that have been posted. And again, thank you to the audience for that. And I'm inviting the audience to post more questions. I just want to go over the comments that have been offered already. We had a comment from someone saying, I see international students are the future of our solid immigration. Why do we throw these challenges at them? The federal government doesn't provide social services for them. The numbers are large and they don't consider helping them to be successful after their graduation. And we shouldn't abandon them in this uncertain time. So certainly that is a sentiment that I think is echoed by many of our panelists as well. I would like to say that HMC webinars, thank you, Rahelia, for your efforts and your organizations. They have followed up with the resources and information you've provided and developed. HMC as a settlement agency are utilizing the sessions that you mentioned. They're helping students find areas to ask and place their questions. And certainly this is something I've also heard as well. International students aren't necessarily aware of where they can find the sorts of services needed. So COSTI creating a pathway for them in partnership with many settlement organisations in the International Student Connect programme and website has been very helpful. And then just finally, there was a question from Paveen Kala from DBNC suggesting that international students should be made eligible to receive services from settlement agencies because currently they're ineligible. So certainly this is a recurring issue that has been raised and certainly raised by our panelists. So now please to our other panelists, if you have questions either for each other or for David, feel free to ask them, unmute yourself and go ahead, and then I'll just monitor the Q&A from the audience.
Si vous me permettez, j'ai une question pour M. David. Et en fait, j'aime toujours de donner des exemples concrets des situations qui sont arrivées justement pour éventuellement savoir comment on peut apporter des réponses par rapport à ce genre de situations. Et au début de la pandémie, sur le site d'IRCC, ça a été annoncé que les étudiants internationaux qui ont obtenu leur permis d'études avant le 18 mars 2020 pourront venir au Canada sans aucun problème. Alors, on a eu des étudiants internationaux justement qui ont essayé de venir au Canada, qui ont même envoyé des courriels aux agents d'immigration justement pour obtenir l'autorisation écrite de la part des agents de l'immigration aussi. Ils l'ont obtenu et qui ont commencé à prendre l'avion. Je vous donne l'exemple juste d'une famille iranienne qui a pris l'avion de Téhéran à Doha et ils étaient supposés de prendre un deuxième avion de Doha à Montréal pour venir ici, mais on leur a dit à Doha que les agents des services frontaliers du Canada ne permettent pas que ces étudiants viennent au Canada, malgré le fait qu'ils ont déjà, l'autorisation écrite et que leur permis d'études a été délivré avant le 18 mars. Alors, on a vu beaucoup de cas similaires où il n'y avait pas une sorte de, il y avait une sorte de contradiction entre ce qui s'est passé au niveau de l'IRCC et des agents de services frontaliers du Canada. En fait, quelles sont les mesures qui ont été prises par les deux ministères au niveau fédéral justement pour remédier à ce problème, pour que les étudiants internationaux qui sont désormais autorisés à venir au Canada ne soient pas ne fassent pas l'objet de ce genre de situation et qui ne soient pas dans cette situation qui, en fait, mettons, au niveau de l'immigration canadienne, on leur permet de venir, mais au niveau des agents de services frontaliers du Canada, on leur interdit de prendre l'avion et de venir au Canada. Et une deuxième question, je voulais juste vous partager justement une pratique prometteuse, une bonne pratique qui a été faite au niveau du Québec. Vous le savez peut-être mieux que moi, les étudiants internationaux qui veulent étudier au Québec, en plus de permis d'études et préalable à l'obtention de permis d'études, doivent obtenir ce qu'on appelle le certificat d'acceptation du Québec. C'est une autorisation de la part du gouvernement provincial. Alors, quand on a eu la pandémie, le gouvernement, en fait, le ministère de l'Immigration au niveau de Québec a décidé de prolonger à peu près 8 mois les certificats d'acceptation de Québec pour que les étudiants ne soient pas amenés à repayer des frais justement pour renouveler leur certificat d'acceptation qui était nécessaire pour obtention le permis d'études. Mais j'aimerais savoir pourquoi nous n'avons pas décidé au niveau du gouvernement fédéral justement d'opter pour ces genres de politiques qui aider les étudiants internationaux déjà à économiser un peu d'argent et ne pas avoir des défis au niveau d'immigration. Merci beaucoup.
I wanted to just jump in. I think it's been so wonderful to hear about the struggle. I mean, not wonderful, but we're hearing a lot about the struggles that current international students are facing with school, with financial struggles, with tuition. But right now, during COVID-19, there's a real crisis about what happens after, right? So after study permit holders graduate, they apply for the postgraduate work permit. And right now, the government has already made some measures to, extend the eligibility period for, study permit holders who are begun to study back home, so that all of that counts. That distance education, the usual requirements, that online classes will still count toward it, and those are all very welcome measures. But right now there are workers who are migrant student workers who are on expiring permits, and because the postgraduate work permit is a permit that students only get once in their lifetime, we're seeing that in these unprecedented and difficult times under COVID-19, that even though the government has extended the restoration period from 90 days to the end of this year, that these migrant student workers who are really in crisis and at risk of deportation are not able to use that change that the government has already created, because the postgraduate work permit is a non-renewable permit, which is why migrant students are saying, under these exceptional circumstances, make the work permit renewable before the end of this year, before December 31st, 2020, which is when the restoration period ends. And so on top of that, and like valuing all work and a number of changes to ensure that they have real access to permanent residency. And so I wanted to bring that to the table. There's also the question of what happens after graduating. Do we just leave them?
Margaret, with your permission, can I add a point also? Okay, if everyone can hear me, I also wanted to just add some more thing. I did talk about connecting the dots and making sure that whatever we have available, first of all, let's make sure that they have access to that information. So, and another thing that I'm very, very excited about that some of the institutions and their faculty members have approached like us through various channels, and they are talking about that, especially during the COVID-19 time, as the students are not physically coming to the universities, we are their main point of contact when we are giving, when they're studying with us, when we're doing their lectures. So what is happening that many students are asking questions from their professors. And, of course, they're a great resource of the academic information which they are providing during those lectures, but they may not have all the other information which the students are looking for. So I have just shared a link in the chat for an upcoming webinar. So what we have done, we have started doing a series of webinars which are open to all the faculty members and anyone who may be interested in sharing the information about the program itself and how to access a webinar or how to get copy of a handbook or read a fact sheet, or no matter whatever kind of information they are looking for, and how to get access to one-on-one settlement services which are offered by our wonderful partners across the province. Because still they are all our partners and are doing an amazing job. They are responding to the queries from the international student on one-on-one basis and in a group formats also. So I just wanted to mention that if anyone is interested in attending that webinar, I have just shared the link for the webinar in the chat. So please feel free to attend this webinar, and please feel free to share this webinar with your other partners, or even this webinar itself is beneficial to the international students, because right now, definitely one thing is important for all these systemic changes which we want to happen, especially availability of settlement services to the international students, and in the same format, the way the pre-arrival services are available to the newcomers. These systemic changes will take time. But one thing we know that we can share information, and that will not take time. So that is very, very crucial and important. So I just wanted to put that up for everyone to see that. And if you have any information, in fact, Saram, you or if anyone would like to use our platform and promote your webinars for the international, we'll be more than happy to do that also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panelists for the questions. And yes, I was going to mention Sharon had put the link to the petition on her website as well. So please do feel free to follow up and put that information more broadly, but I'll just remind people that it's if they check the website migrantrights.ca/migrant students, and Rohelia has posted the information about the webinar. David, could I ask you to respond to the questions posed by our panelists, and then I'll turn back to the Q&A that have been posted.
Sure. Sorry about that. It's always wrong button there. There we go. No, that's great. No, thanks for the question. And I think some of them, like I can go a bit in turn. I mean, I think Armin, I think I'd speak in French, but I think I'm on the wrong channel, so I won't. Je m'adresserai en français, mais bon, je vais pas. I might be in the wrong channel, so I'll answer in English. And I think on your question on concrete examples, I think, you know, and it was a bit of the experience, like really from a first person perspective, like, you know, we were, you know, the pandemic hit everybody equally. You know, it's been unprecedented, and I know, you know, I'm just thinking on my, you know, I'm in a bit of a new place, a new job, that is. But in the spring, you know, we were struggling, frankly, and I think it's not a criticism. I think we were doing everything we could to try to keep ahead, and to your points is really connect the dots. So I don't think that a week went by without us spending, you know, 2-3 hours with provinces and territories in terms of just making sure, do we understand what's going on, and do we have a bit of a, like, how do we communicate the changes? And the rules have been changing, and to your point, so I totally get how you know, it's been tough for a prospective student or somebody who's trying to travel to really figure out, you know, can I travel? If I'm coming to study, is that going to be considered discretionary or non-discretionary travel? And I think that's a bit of the you know, the challenge that that we faced throughout the period, because I think there's a bunch of rules that are sort of overlay, right? Having a study permit and authorized to travel is one thing, but because of the public health context, it is, you know, just having to satisfy a border services officer either before they even board a plane, but definitely as they enter Canada, that, you know, the travel is indeed deemed essential. So I think that was definitely something that we worked out, you know, and I think it was totally an evolution as well with the CBSA and frankly Public Health Agency of Canada colleagues. And I think on this, you know, we are doing our best to try to share that information with provinces and territories, but also with the academic sector. I think we had a very, you know, it was very regular, and I think there was a lot of just info exchange that, you know, obviously, you know, we couldn't get everything perfect, but I know that we were doing what we could to try to communicate that, so students wouldn't face, and their families wouldn't face, well, disruption and disappointment as they're turning up at the border, because that, you know, that's not good for them, and it's definitely not good for you know, for the for this, you know, for us as trying to put our best foot forward in terms of you know, openness and welcoming and the welcome to this population. In terms of, you know, and I'll sort of on Sarom, like, you know, I think I really do appreciate the input, and I think that, you know, in terms of the renewability of work permits, you know, and you mentioned a lot of the facilitation that we've done, that the departments try to put in place, and a lot of it's been around trying to ensure, and I think this is a lot of stuff that's been on our website, is just trying to give some reassurance to students that if they are running out of status, like there is that the restoration period has been brought up. If they can't submit, if somebody can't submit all of the documentation, you know, no applications being refused right now for not having provided a document. So there's a bit more flexibility and time. In full honesty, I've lost track a bit myself of where we are at in terms of, I think, renewability on postgrads. You're absolutely right. My sense is that there was some facilitation for those who who were coming into the end of a work permit of a postgrad, the ability to either restore or apply for a new authorization, I thought is something that I think is still not at all there. So I think that's something that I'm happy to sort of take back to colleagues who are looking at the area and those issues. And then finally, I think, it's less of a question, I think, that Rahila was asking, but your points around sort of the accessing the information and, and something that we'd heard too, as we're talking with some of the big sort of sector stakeholders in the education space. Like I think of the Canadian Bureau for International Education, and not to point one actor out, but I know the CBIE has been doing a lot in the space of mental health for one thing, but also just being aware of the different requirements and pressures that are being put on sort of academics and professors, and whether that's the best. Like I think there's a bit of a, to your point, around partnerships and the whole of society approach. Like how are we together doing, what are we doing, and are we doing enough across each other's kind of spheres of influence and accountability to help along with this. So I might leave it there, and then we can continue. Margaret, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we have some more questions from the audience. So Teresa Costa asks, would IRCC consider opening online pre-arrival settlement services to international students so that from the very start of their journey prior to entry, they are aware of and connected to settlement related services? And then I'll ask, this other question is directed to you, David, as well. From Dean Christie. Hi, David. I know of former international students who are currently employed and trying to seek permanent resident status. However, they are facing the issue where the points keep shifting. What happens after the work permit expires? And then this is also directed to David from an anonymous attendee. Can IRCC explain their targeted objectives behind bringing international students to Canada? Is it more about economy or building communities? Is building communities also an objective too? And I would just add to that question, of course, there is an important issue in terms of financing the post-secondary education sector. So David, did you catch all of those?
I think so. Like I can start. I mean, on eligibility, that's a huge question, and we hear it, and we've heard it from you, and I think I'm glad that it keeps coming up. And I think sort of we know it's a long-standing recommendation, and it's a long-standing request. And I think right now, I mean, with the authorities that are in place, international students and temporary residents are not eligible for federally funded services. I think I referred to some of the work we're doing with the provinces and the territories in terms of getting a sense of what is out there and being offered. We've got today fantastic examples of what's being done in Ontario and what's been put in place since 2014. We know that in Quebec, a bit of a different regime as well. So I think that's efforts that we're trying to make in terms of trying to do two things: assess, what are the needs? Are they really around information and orientation, or in the pre-arrival space, or are they kind of things? Are we facing challenges with regard to sort of language ability or that kind of thing? Or so I think there's a bit of an information gathering. I mean, that sounds more incremental. It is incremental, but I think we need to know what's being done out there, and where's the role from a federal funding perspective. And I think it's important. I think when we start talking about eligibility, and I mentioned that we are working and looking at this issue with the provinces and territories with whom there is a bit of a co-delivery and co-planning aspect. But in the I think the fiscal context is something that we have on our front and top of mind in terms of there is, we know, increasing pressure on the overall settlement envelope. And I think when the choices have to be made in terms of expanding the eligibility of clients, I think altering eligibility parameters may involve us having to have some conversations around what the trade-offs could be. So I think that's some of the space we're in terms of eligibility. Like, absolutely open to hearing about needs. Like I think it's crucial, and I think that's why I'm super, that's why I'm glad we're having the conversation and hearing more about what are the needs, what the needs are. But I think it's moving forward as we get into a space where we think, okay, what could we do? I think the question will be, well, how do we, how does government sort of address just competing needs and how to pay for it? That was on eligibility. The second, the sort of Dean's question on points. So I'm going to assume we mean like points in express entry, like the selection system keeps shifting. And in that sense, yeah, I mean, I think there's been a degree of stability since the changes that were introduced 2016, 2017 to give former students more points. I think those points have really shown, we've seen the number of international students coming through express entry, for instance, and the federal economic programs has risen, has risen since then. You'll have seen an announcement, I think yesterday, around additional points for candidates who are bilingual or who have French as a first language, as another sort of incitatif, incentive. That's the word, incentive to promote francophone immigration. So there's a space there where the points keep getting tweaked and adjusted to support some objectives. But I think on points that students get have been, maybe I'm misinterpreting your question, but I'm hoping that I think it hasn't gone backwards for former students who are looking to qualify. And then on the objectives, that's a great question, and I think I'd almost it's not just an IRCC objective. I think the government in 2019 sort of renewed its international education strategy, and this is a piece that IRCC is a partner in that strategy, but it's also something that's led and co-led by Global Affairs Canada and ESDC, and it's work that we do with all of the provinces and territories, and for a couple of reasons. And I think you hit on two of them. I mean, the economic contributions of international students. I think this is a number we read a lot, and we repeat a lot too. Is the $21 billion of contribution, whether that's to tuition fees or it's contributions that come into communities through sort of the impact. But as you mentioned, like the social side of it, and I think I mentioned that in my own remarks, like the fact that bringing in international students helps diversify and internationalize our classrooms, and the benefit that brings just in terms of the people-to-people contacts and enriching, I think, the classrooms. So I think multiple objectives being pursued by why it is we focus on international students as a group, at least to attract. And then from the retention perspectives across the federal economic or federal immigration pathways, but also many of the provinces and the provincial nominee pathways they have, like international students are seen as I was mentioning in my remarks, huge potential there from just in terms of filling, of helping us fill our ambitious immigration growth targets and objectives.
Thank you, David. We have another question from Catherine Peterson from the YMCA of the Three Rivers. And she suggests, I think it's important to consider secondary and even elementary international students in this discussion. Within our school board in Waterloo region, we see high numbers of students in this category, and they have unique needs and have become even more complex in this global pandemic. We know that IRCC has this settlement workers in schools, Swiss, to serve these students, but we're wondering how we can better serve this group and look to those transitioning to post-secondary and program to guide this transition. And so Catherine says this may not be a question, it's more a comment. I would certainly open this up to all of the panelists. And just a comment, yes, I mean, I teach at Wilfrid Laurier University, and I'm working with some wonderful students who have been studying in high schools in Canada and then have transitioned into the post-secondary sector. So certainly I can can certainly see that working out. So any responses to Catherine's question about students in the secondary and elementary sector and their special needs?
I just wanted to add again, it's more of a comment that based on our experience working across the province with various institutions, we have been approached many a time by students who are still secondaries in the schools still, and they are not technically eligible for, again, the services which are offered by the program, which are primarily for college and university students. And there are really some, if I wish we had someone else on our panel who could have directly talked about their experiences, but what we have been hearing that they are in a very precarious and fluid situation also, because there are sometimes cases that one person is responsible for more than 50 to 60, like one person is responsible for legal guardian for that many number of students, and Toronto District School Board has a huge number of international students, and same is the case in the Peel region also. And those students' needs are definitely not met the way they should be met by the current system. And personally, I do have big time reservation of this guardianship in which one person has a load of between 60 to sometimes even 100 students. We can manage that. Two of our, like I have two boys, I can manage them. So I cannot even imagine being responsible for that many group of people. But apparently the parents wants to expose their children, and they feel that if they can give them access to this education in Canada. But are we doing our duty as a society to make sure, and as a government to make sure that their needs are met?
Est-ce que, en tant que le mot de la fin de ma part, est-ce que je peux faire quelques propositions, éventuellement, très rapidement? D'abord, c'est très important de ne pas oublier les étudiants qui font des études dans le cadre de programmes coopératifs coop, parce que le fait de suivre un stage après avoir fini les études ou au cours des études fait partie intégrante de ces programmes d'études, mais on se trouve dans beaucoup de situations où malheureusement les étudiants coop n'ont pas la possibilité de trouver du travail ou de stage nécessaire. Deuxièmement, éventuellement, s'il y a une possibilité d'alléger des conditions d'autonomie financière pour les étudiants qui sont ici au Canada, qui se trouvent déjà au Canada et qui sont amenés à renouveler leur permis d'études. On l'a vu récemment avec le programme de parrainage pour les parents et les grands-parents. On a vu que les conditions financières ont été allégées, alors il y a moins d'exigences. Alors pourquoi pas avec les étudiants internationaux qui veulent renouveler leur permis d'études sur place aussi, qu'on ne soit pas très exigeant là-dessus. Et troisièmement, éventuellement, s'il y a une possibilité de suspendre la règle de 150 jours par rapport au respect des conditions de séjour. Comme je vous ai expliqué tout à l'heure, nous avons beaucoup d'étudiants internationaux qui étaient en train d'étudier. Le programme d'études a été suspendu ou l'école peut-être n'existe plus du tout parce que l'école n'a pas pu survivre la pandémie. Et après, maintenant, juste pour respecter leurs conditions de séjour, ces étudiants sont amenés à aller choisir des programmes d'études qui ne reflètent pas leur intérêt académique, juste pour pouvoir avoir un statut légal ici au Canada. Et enfin, renouveler les permis de travail post-diplôme parce que ces étudiants-là sont arrivés au Canada avec beaucoup de projets d'avenir. Ils sont arrivés avec des projets d'immigration. Alors, le fait de ne pas pouvoir accumuler le nombre de mois nécessaires justement pour passer à travers de différents programmes d'immigration tels que Canadian Experience Program ou bien le programme Expérience québécoise va les mettre dans une situation extrêmement difficile et fera en sorte que leur projet d'immigration tombe à l'eau. Merci beaucoup.
Absolutely. Thank you, David, for confirming that you will take it back to your colleagues and talk to them about renewability, because especially for those who have 12 to 24 months on their only 1 to 2 year permits that were issued last year. And with 7 months into this crisis, we're already seeing the second wave spike up everywhere. COVID is here to stay. This is the new reality. And like you said, these are unprecedented and difficult times. We need to, students are calling on the government to make this necessary and simple change to make the postgraduate work permit renewable before the end of this year, because there is already an extension of the restoration period, December 31st, 2020. And I look forward to continuing this discussion with IRCC as well as the Minister of Immigration, Marco Mendicino's office, about this matter that over 15,000 have signed petitions in support of and sent letters about.
I would just like to add one more thing, and I hope like there will be some consideration given to the extension of at least initially information and orientation services to the prospective international students, the way they are offered to the newcomers, and also like I know we don't have any representation or much representation in today's participants from many of the universities and colleges, but a greater understanding of that how working in partnership will be a win-win situation for everyone, because all the universities and colleges do want to retain those students. They do want them to stay and continue their and finish their study program. So it is really, really crucial to reach out to those students while they are still at a one central point, and that is at the institution. Once they graduate and disperse in the society, it is very difficult to outreach to them and give them the relevant information. So it is really a win-win situation for everyone if the information sharing can happen at both pre-arrival and post-arrival stage while they are at the institution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those responses. I think there's a lot of requests there for David to take the information back to his colleagues at IRCC, which I'm sure he will do. I just want to ask, there's one other question from the audience. Teresa Costa has said, this is a question for the panelists. Who is missing from your settlement services connections? What do you need from those of us who are participating in this conference?
I can of course only respond on behalf of those settlement agencies who are working in the province of Ontario. So we would like to like anyone to come and again help us disseminate this information to the international students. Even if they're approaching you on one-on-one basis, there are, because all this information is free, it's available to them, it's available 24/7. And we're just very briefly, we have just launched a chatbot also, because we found that many of the tech savvy users are looking for updated, relevant, quick information in bite-sized pieces. So COSTI has just launched a chatbot which addresses the concerns of all immigration categories. So, but I do not have the time to talk more about that here, but definitely I am going to share the link for the chatbot. In fact, it is on settlement.org. So if you go to the International Student Connect or Orientation to Ontario program, or if you go to costi.org, and there is a link for the chatbot there. So please widely disseminate these resources because we need to connect people. Thank you.
So we had another comment from Catherine Peterson following up on the question about students in the primary and secondary sector, and of course recognizing that they're also facing disruption, and there are some students that are considering returning to their home countries, and that would of course put their education in Canada and actually back in their home country at risk, and of course not to mention the mental health impacts. And I think we've had that certainly that issue be evident throughout our discussions. So we have just a few minutes to wrap up, and I think we've answered all of the questions from our audience. I would like to thank the audience and thank them for their questions. Before I kind of round up things, I didn't know, David, if you had any further comments or responses you would like to offer, since so much has been sort of directed at your way as the funnel, as it were, to policymakers.
No, I'm just to thank the audience and my colleagues here on the panel for bringing the questions. And I am happy to share with the groups that are looking at the issues. And I think to Saram's point, I think that and Margaret, you mentioned at the beginning, like, I think the fact that you've got you're the 15,000 and you mentioned some work ongoing efforts. So I think that's a key part of what's ahead of us for sure. So no, I appreciate the views, and happy to sort of pass along, and I really appreciate the ongoing conversation as well. And I think in terms of the what can we do differently, better, more, and I think information and connecting the dots, I think it's something we can do now, and I think that's a great immediate step. So thanks very much, Margaret, for the opportunity.
Great. So I would just like to take the opportunity to wrap things up, just to remind everybody that the session was organised by the Building Migrant Resilience in Cities Research Group. That's based at York University. Valerie Preston is the principal investigator. You can search that on the internet, the BMRC at York. We will be putting together a short kind of policy report, a policy brief based on the contents of this discussion. So we hope to share that with everyone, and together with all of the other resources that our panelists have shared. So we look forward to sharing that with you. I would just like to, on behalf of the audience and everybody else, I'd like to thank our panelists, Saram Rowe, who's an organizer with the Migrant Students United at Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. Thank you. Armin Bumerand, who works at the CSAI in Montreal. Thank you very much. Rahilia Mushtag, who's the general manager at COSTI, and David Kasabak with Immigration IRCC. So thank you all so much for being part of this panel. Thank you very much to the audience for your questions, and thank you to COSTI for organizing this, and for the webinar support, and for the translators. It was most informative. Thank you all so much. And I think at that we are a couple of minutes early, but I'd like to invite you to continue with your conference going, and thank the panelists, and say that we will be following up with some policy reports. And I think we can leave it at that, but thank you all very much.
Thank you for moderating an excellent session, Margaret.
Thank you. Was lots of information, and as I said, we look forward to sharing more information through the Building Migrant Resilience in Cities policy reports that we will be putting out, and we hope to continue with further engagements on this issue. I think it's clear from the discussions that we've had in this panel that there are lots of dots to connect. There's an importance of this whole of society approach. There are many actors involved, and we look forward to working more fully with everyone, making sure that we can address the issues that international students are facing during this time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And I look forward to talking further about getting the necessary changes we need.
Great. Thank you very much, Saram. Bye-bye.